The money was a number on a screen, a number so large it felt fictional. For Isaiah, it was the line between watching his daughter, Layla, slowly lose her hearing in a world that had no patience for silence, and giving her a fighting chance. The cochlear implant surgery was a miracle, but it was a miracle with a price tag that mocked his janitor's salary. So when he saw the flyer taped to a lamppost outside the hospital, healthy volunteers needed for pharmaceutical trial, generous compensation, felt like a sign. The clinic was too clean, too bright. The other volunteers in the waiting room were a collection of the desperate, college students with debt in their eyes, older men with hard luck stories etched into their faces. Isaiah was the only black man there. The administrator, a woman with a crisp white coat and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, handed him a stack of papers. The print was small, the language dense with words like immunomodulatory and neurological pathways. The compound designated Xyralin is a breakthrough in cognitive enhancement, the lead researcher, Dr. Albright, had explained. He was a man with the confident, smooth tone of a news anchor. We're simply observing its effects on healthy subjects to establish a baseline. The risks are minimal, fatigue perhaps, some nausea, but the compensation, as you can see, is significant. Significant, the word echoed in Isaiah's mind. It was enough for the surgery, enough for a year of therapy, enough to give Layla a voice. He signed the papers. The first injection was a cold pinch in his arm. For a week, nothing. He felt a surge of energy, a clarity of thought that was almost euphoric. He could remember things with perfect detail, solve complex problems in his head. He told himself he'd gotten lucky. This was a blessing. Then the changes began. It started with the light. The fluorescence in the clinic where he worked began to feel like daggers in his eyes. He started wearing sunglasses indoors. Then came the sounds. The rumble of the subway was a physical assault, a vibration that felt like it was cracking his bones. He stuffed his ears with wads of paper, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with his hands. His body began to rebel. His joints ached with a deep, grinding pain. His skin became sensitive, the texture of his own clothes an unbearable irritation. He developed a tremor in his hands, a constant humming vibration that made it hard to hold a mop, let alone his daughter. He went back to the clinic. Dr. Albright was dismissive. Expected side effects, Mr. Jones. Your system is just acclimating. The compensation for this phase is even higher. And they offered him more money, a much larger sum, enough to cover the surgery and a trust fund for Layla. It was a bribe, and he was too deep in the hole of his own desperation to refuse it. He took the money. He took the next injection. The monster emerged slowly. His temper, once a patient, slow-burning thing, became a flash fire. He snapped at his supervisor, nearly shoving him over a misplaced bucket. The man's look of fear didn't register as a warning. It felt like a victory. His senses were now weapons. He could hear the frantic, bird-like heartbeat of the woman who lived downstairs. He could smell the faint, metallic tang of illness on a coworker. The world was a barrage of raw, unfiltered data, and his brain was screaming under the load. He started avoiding people. He couldn't control the rage that bubbled up when someone brushed past him in a crowd, the sensory input like a physical blow. He stopped going to Layla's school plays, the noise and the crowd an unbearable torture. She would look at him with her big, confused eyes, her hands signing, "Daddy, are you sick?" He was sick, but he was also strong, unnaturally strong. He accidentally ripped the metal handle off the janitor's closet door. The strength felt good. It felt like power in a life that had always been defined by its lack. The rage felt good, too. It burned away the fear, the helplessness. The final break happened at a grocery store. A man bumped into his cart hard. A jolt of pain shot through Isaiah's hypersensitive nerves. A red haze descended. He didn't think. He just reacted. He grabbed the man by his jacket and lifted him off the ground, slamming him into a pyramid of canned goods. The sound was a thunderclap. People screamed. The man stared up at him, his face a mask of pure animal terror. And in that face, Isaiah saw himself. he saw the monster. He dropped the man and ran. He ran from the store, from the screaming, from the life he was destroying. He locked himself in his apartment in the dark with the curtains drawn. He was a prisoner in his own skin. The money was in the bank. Layla's surgery was scheduled. He had gotten everything he wanted, and he had lost everything he was. He looked in the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, his pupils dilated. His body was coiled tight, a spring of barely contained violence. He was no longer Isaiah, the father who told bad jokes and could fix a broken doll. He was a side effect, a failed experiment, a monster created in a lab and paid for with his own desperation. The doorbell rang. It was a shrill, painful shriek in his skull. It was Layla home from her friend's house. He couldn't let her in. He couldn't let her see him like this. But he also couldn't leave her out there. He was her father. He was all she had. He was trapped between the man he used to be and the thing he had become, the cash in his bank account feeling like blood money, and the love for his daughter the only chain left holding the monster at bay. The doorbell was a needle driven straight into his brain. Each ring was a fresh jolt of agony, ratcheting the tension in his body tighter. He could hear her, a small, frantic heartbeat on the other side of the door. He could smell the faint scent of strawberry shampoo and the salt of her anxious tears. "Daddy, Daddy, please open the door." Her voice, even muffled, was a siren's call and a torture. It was the only sound in the world that could cut through the static of rage and pain. He squeezed his eyes shut, his fists clenched so tight his nails bit into his palms. The beast inside him snarled, wanting to smash the door, to scream at the source of the painful noise. The man, the ghost of Isaiah, fought back, clinging to the image of her face. He couldn't let her see him like this, a twitching, wild-eyed thing cowering in the dark. The ringing stopped, a small, defeated sob. Then the sound of her sitting on the hallway floor, her back against the door. He could feel the vibration of it through the wood. She was waiting. She wasn't going away. He crawled away from the door, retreating to the farthest corner of the living room, pulling a heavy blanket over his head to block out the sliver of light under the curtains. In the oppressive darkness, the internal storm was even louder. His thoughts raced, fragmented and paranoid. Dr. Albright had done this. They had known. The money wasn't compensation, it was a purchase price. They had bought his body, his mind, and turned it into this broken thing. He must have fallen into a fitful sleep because he was jolted awake by a new sound. A key in the lock. The landlord, Layla, must have gone to him. The door opened, flooding the dark apartment with painful light. Isaiah recoiled, a guttural growl ripping from his throat. "Mr. Jones," the landlord's voice was cautious. "Isaiah, you in here, your daughter's worried sick." "Get out," Isaiah rasped, his voice unrecognizable, a gravelly threat. The landlord took a step inside, and Isaiah saw him silhouetted in the doorway. A threat. An intruder. The beast surged forward, fueled by a primal need to protect its territory. Isaiah was on his feet before he even decided to move, a surge of unnatural strength propelling him across the room. He grabbed the landlord by the front of his shirt, the fabric tearing easily in his grip. "Isaiah, no." Layla's scream was a shard of ice through the red haze. He froze, the landlord's terrified face inches from his own. He looked over the man's shoulder and saw his daughter standing in the hallway, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror he had never seen directed at him before. It was the look she'd given the monster on TV, not her father. The fight drained out of him. He released the landlord, who stumbled back into the hallway, gasping. "Call the police," the landlord yelled, scrambling away. Layla didn't move. She just stared at Isaiah, her small body trembling. He sank to his knees, the weight of what he had almost done crushing him. "Layla, baby, I'm so sorry." She took a hesitant step inside, the door still open behind her. She didn't come close. "What's wrong with you, Daddy?" What could he say? That he had sold himself to become a medical nightmare for her. that the money for her new ears had cost him his own mind. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly closer. The landlord had called them. Panic seized him again. They would take him away. They would lock him up. He was a danger. He looked at Layla, at the fear and confusion on her face, and he knew he couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let her see him in handcuffs, dragged away like an animal. "Layla, listen to me," he said, his voice urgent, desperate. "You have to go to your Aunt Sharon's. Do you understand? Tell her. Tell her to use the money in the account for your surgery." "Where are you going?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. I have to fix this," he lied. He had no idea how to fix it. He just knew he had to run. He had to get away from everyone before he hurt someone else. He grabbed a backpack, shoved a few random items of clothing into it, and ran to the door. He paused, wanting to hug her, to kiss her forehead, but he was afraid to touch her, afraid of his own strength, afraid he would break her. "I love you, Layla," he whispered, his voice breaking, "more than anything." Then he ran. He fled down the back stairwell, his body moving with a speed and grace that was no longer his own, bursting out into the alley just as the police cars screeched to a halt out front. He melted into the shadows, a monster fleeing the ruins of his own life. He was homeless now, a creature of the city's underbelly. The side effects were his constant companions, the painful sensitivity to light and sound, the tremors, the surges of rage. But out here in the darkness, the rage found a purpose. He found he could intimidate other predators, stealing from thieves, taking over abandoned spaces. He was becoming a king of the forgotten, a myth whispered among the homeless, a giant, silent ghost who moved with impossible speed and could break a man's arm with a flick of his wrist. He was surviving, but he was no longer Isaiah. He was the monster fully formed. And every night he looked up at the cold, distant stars, wondering if Layla had gotten her surgery, and if the sound of his voice was just one more thing she had lost. The city's underbelly became his new ecosystem. The constant, low-grade agony of his heightened senses was a price he paid for a brutal kind of awareness. He could hear a rat scurrying 3 alleys over, smell the stale beer on a man's breath from 20 feet away. The world was a symphony of overwhelming data, but he was learning to conduct it, to use the pain as a radar. He slept in the skeletal remains of a burned-out factory, a place where the silence was almost complete, broken only by the wind whistling through shattered windows. He foraged from dumpsters behind restaurants, his new metabolism requiring vast amounts of food. The other inhabitants of the shadows gave him a wide berth. They'd seen what happened to the 2 men who tried to rob him. He hadn't even hurt them, not really. He just picked one up by his belt and jacket and held him, dangling and terrified, over a dumpster until his friend fled. Then he'd set him down gently. The message was sent. He was not to be bothered. He was a ghost, a rumor, but he was a ghost with a purpose. He had stashed the bank card linked to Layla's surgery fund in a secret pocket of his backpack. He would find a library, use a public computer to check the balance, to make sure it was still there, untouched. It was his tether to the man he used to be. One night, huddled in his factory fortress, the tremors were worse than usual. A cold sweat soaked his clothes and his teeth chattered. It felt like his very bones were trying to escape his skin. This was new. This was a crash, a withdrawal. The Xyralin was demanding its price. In his feverish state, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. The consent forms, the small print. He had been so focused on the number he'd barely scanned them. But now his enhanced, broken mind recalled a phrase, a single line buried in a paragraph about post-trial obligations. Participants may be contacted for follow-up observational studies. A follow-up. They knew he would become this. They expected asterisk it. He wasn't a volunteer, he was a subject in a much longer, much darker experiment. A new kind of rage, cold and focused, began to burn through the sickness. They had taken everything, his peace, his daughter, his humanity, and they were still out there in their clean, bright clinic, probably signing up the next desperate soul. He wasn't just a monster, he was evidence. The next day, the hunt began. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was an instinct, a new drive overriding the old ones of survival and grief. He started watching the clinic from a rooftop across the street. He saw the parade of the hopeful and the hopeless walking in. He saw Dr. Albright leaving in his sleek, silent electric car. He tracked him to a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a world away from the factory and the alley. He learned the rhythms, the security. He was no longer just a beast reacting to stimuli. He was a predator with a target. Weeks passed. The side effects were stabilizing into a new, terrible normal. The rage was a constant hum, but he could leash it now, direct it. He was hunting himself into a weapon. One rainy night, he made his move. Dr. Albright was working late. His car was the last one in the clinic's lot. The security guard made his rounds at predictable intervals. Isaiah moved like a shadow, his enhanced muscles carrying him over the high fence with ease, his sensitive fingers finding purchase on the slick brick. He picked the lock on a second-floor window with a paperclip, his movements unnervingly precise. He dropped silently into the dark hallway. He could smell Albright's cologne, hear the soft tap of his fingers on a keyboard. He followed the scent, the sound, a shark drawn to blood in the water. He pushed the office door open. Dr. Albright looked up from his computer screen, his face initially showing annoyance, then confusion, and finally, a dawning, primal terror as he recognized the hulking, rain-soaked figure in his doorway. "You," Albright whispered, scrambling back in his chair. "Jones, you need to leave. I'm calling security." Isaiah didn't speak. He just stood there, letting the doctor take in the full measure of what he had created, the dilated eyes, the corded muscles straining against the worn fabric of his jacket, the sheer, terrifying stillness of him. "You knew," Isaiah said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the sterile air. "You knew what this would do." "It was unexpected," Albright stammered, his eyes darting towards the phone on his desk. "A rare set of side effects. We're studying it. We can help you." "Help me?" Isaiah took a step forward, and the flimsy desk seemed to shrink between them. "You turned me into this, for a follow-up study, to see how your monster would behave." He reached out, not for the doctor, but for the laptop. He picked it up, the metal groaning in his grip, and with a casual twist of his wrists, he snapped it in half, the screen going dark, the internal components sparking. "All of it," Isaiah growled. "The data, the files on the others, give it to me." Albright was hyperventilating now. "I can't, it's proprietary, it's encrypted." Isaiah leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more frightening than any shout. "You look at me, doctor. Do I look like I care about your patents?" Trembling, Albright pointed a shaking finger towards a small, discreet safe behind a framed medical degree. The backup drive, it's in there." Isaiah didn't ask for the combination. He gripped the safe's handle, set his feet, and pulled. The metal shrieked in protest, the lock mechanism groaning, and with a final, wrenching tear, the entire door came away in his hand. Inside was a single, black hard drive. He pocketed it. He looked back at Albright, who was now weeping softly, curled in his chair. "I'm not going to hurt you," Isaiah said, and the truth of it surprised even him. The rage was there, a fire begging to be fed, but it was controlled. "But the next person you try to turn into this, I will know, and I will find you." He turned and left the way he came, disappearing back into the rain and the darkness. He wasn't just a monster anymore. He was a consequence. He had the truth in his pocket. Now, he just had to figure out what to do with it, and whether there was any path back from the abyss for a man who was no longer a man. The fight for his soul had just taken a new, more dangerous turn. The hard drive was a cold, heavy stone in his pocket, a stark contrast to the feverish heat burning through his body. He didn't return to the factory. That was a den, a place for a beast to lick its wounds. He had crossed a line. He was no longer just surviving, he was acting. He was hunting. He found a new refuge, the damp, concrete cavern of a storm drain. The constant drip of water was a meditation, the darkness a balm for his ravaged eyes. Here, with the city's hidden heartbeat echoing around him, he confronted the drive. He needed a computer, not a library terminal with its firewalls and filters. He needed access. The memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. Layla's new laptop, a sleek silver thing he'd bought with the first payment, still sitting in its box in their old apartment. The thought was a physical pain. He couldn't go back there. It was a crime scene now, a place of his final human failure. Instead, he watched. From the shadows, he observed a young tech worker who frequented a late-night coffee shop, always hunched over an expensive, unsecured laptop. One night, as the man stepped away to use the restroom, Isaiah moved. He was a blur in the periphery, a gust of wind. By the time the man returned, sipping his latte, the hard drive had been connected, its data copied to a cloud storage account Isaiah created with a throwaway email, and the drive itself was back in Isaiah's pocket. The entire operation took less than 90 seconds. Back in the storm drain, on a cheap, prepaid smartphone bought with stolen cash, he began to read. The files were a horror story, and he was a central character. Xyralin wasn't a cognitive enhancer. It was a failed military-grade neuroweapon designed to create supersoldiers. It had been shelved because test subjects exhibited extreme psychological degradation and loss of unit cohesion. They became uncontrollable, paranoid monsters. Albright's biotech firm, Ethelgard Pharmaceuticals, had acquired the compound, repurposing it for human trials under the false banner of cognitive medicine. They were studying the degradation, documenting the adverse events, all while collecting data to refine their chemical weapon. Isaiah saw his own file, videos of him in his sterile clinic room, his pupils dilated, his speech rapid and euphoric in the early stages. Then, the later notes. Subject 734 Jones exhibits marked aggression, sensory hypersensitivity, and significant musculoskeletal augmentation. A prime specimen of the Titan class reaction. A prime specimen, he was their star monster. He saw the files on the others. A college student named Chloe who had torn her dorm room apart in a fit of paranoia and was now in a psychiatric ward. An aging construction worker, Frank, who had been found dead in his apartment. The official cause a heart attack, the unofficial note in the file reading. Cerebral hemorrhage consistent with Xyralin-induced hypertensive crisis. He wasn't just a victim, he was a witness to murder. The cold, focused rage returned, but this time it was clean, sharp. It was a tool. They had turned him into a weapon. Maybe it was time he started acting like one. His first target was not Ethelgard, but the system that protected it. He compiled the most damning evidence. The internal emails discussing the compound's true origins, the video of Frank's final, agonized phone call to the clinic which they had recorded and dismissed, the financial records showing massive military contracts. He encrypted it all. Then he went to the one person he believed might listen, might understand the cost. Maya Santos, the reporter who had covered the story of Kofi Jones and the bag of cash. She had a reputation for digging, for caring about the people behind the headlines. He created a new encrypted email. The message was short. Attached is evidence of human experimentation, corporate malfeasance, and murder by Ethelgard Pharmaceuticals. The subject you called a monster is the source. The next delivery will be more public. He didn't sign it, he didn't need to. The next night he went to Ethelgard's gleaming headquarters. This was not a stealth mission. This was a statement. He walked directly up to the main entrance, a colossal glass atrium, and instead of trying to pick the lock, he simply punched through the reinforced glass next to the door frame. The alarm was a physical blow, a shrieking wail that felt like it was drilling into his teeth. He ignored it. He strode through the empty lobby, his boots crunching on broken glass, and went to the reception desk. He ripped the computer monitor from its housing, held it up to a security camera, and using his finger like a stylus, he scratched a single word into the shattered LCD screen. Titan. Then he turned and walked back out into the night, the sirens growing louder behind him. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was drawing a line. He was the consequence they had engineered, and he was coming for them. The monster was no longer in the shadows. It was on the front page, and it was demanding a reckoning. The city awoke to a digital scream. Maya Santos, true to her reputation, had worked through the night. Her story wasn't just on the front page, it was the front page, dominating every news site and social media feed. The headline was brutal in its simplicity. Titan, the human weapon Ethelgard built and betrayed. It wasn't just an article, it was a digital dossier. She had published the internal emails, the video of Frank's final call, the cold clinical notes that referred to human beings as specimens. And at the heart of it all was the story of Isaiah Jones, a janitor, a father, who had vanished and been reborn as a monster in their lab. The public outrage was nuclear. Protesters swarmed Ethelgard's headquarters, their chants echoing the alarm Isaiah had triggered. The stock price plummeted. Federal agencies, who had previously turned a blind eye, launched immediate investigations. Isaiah watched it all from the storm drain, the blue glow of the phone screen reflecting in his eyes. He felt no triumph, only a grim satisfaction. The beast had been given a voice. But Ethelgard was a hydra. While the public face of the company was in chaos, its private security apparatus, a ruthless paramilitary force, was activated. Their mission: containment, erasure. They couldn't kill the story, but they could kill the source. They found him 2 nights later. He was scavenging behind a restaurant, his senses momentarily overwhelmed by the rot and the rancid grease when they hit him. It wasn't a bullet. It was a high-pitched sonic emitter, a weapon designed for the very Titan-class subjects they had created. The sound was a white-hot spike driven directly into his brain. He roared, collapsing to his knees, his hands clawing at his ears. Men in black tactical gear, devoid of insignia, emerged from the shadows. They moved with a cold, efficient precision. They tasered him, the voltage meant for a bull elephant. His muscles seized, but the xyralin in his system fought back, metabolizing the shock, fueling his rage. He threw off the barbs, surging to his feet. The fight was brutal, ugly, and short. He was a force of nature, but they were a scalpel. They used nets, tranquilizer darts, and the relentless sonic weapon. He broke one man's arm, dislocated another's jaw, but they were too many, too prepared. A dart filled with a powerful sedative finally found its mark in his neck. The world swam, the edges of his vision blurring into a toxic green. The last thing he saw was the cold, impassive face of the team leader looking down at him. He awoke in a concrete cell. It was featureless, soundproofed, lit by a single, dim red bulb recessed behind a thick grate in the ceiling. The walls were lined with the same sonic emitters that had brought him down. He was stripped to his pants, his body covered in bruises and track marks from the sedatives. A reinforced steel door with no handle stood opposite him. This was not a prison. It was a laboratory cage. Days bled into a timeless agony. They would flood the cell with the debilitating sonic frequency, then observe him as he writhed on the floor. They tested his strength, his reflexes, his pain tolerance. Dr. Albright, his face a mask of detached scientific curiosity, would sometimes appear behind a thick plexiglass observation window, taking notes. "You are magnificent, Subject 734, Albright said once, his voice tinny through an intercom. "The data we're collecting is invaluable. You are the key to the next generation." Isaiah stopped responding. He stopped roaring. He conserved his energy, his rage turning inwards, compressing into a diamond-hard core of hatred. He played their game, letting them think they had broken him, that he was just an animal reacting to stimuli. But he was learning. He learned the patterns of the sonic attacks. He learned the timing of the food slot opening. He learned that the red light was on a 12-hour cycle. And he was planning. His chance came during a stress test. They introduced a new compound into his food, something designed to induce a berserker rage. They wanted to see the upper limits of his destructive potential. He felt it ignite in his veins, a fire that threatened to burn away the last of his reason. The sonic emitters whined to life, a new, more painful frequency. But this time he was ready. He had spent weeks subtly working a single, loose bolt on one of the emitter housings with his fingernail, which had grown unnaturally hard and thick. As the sound hit him, he didn't fight it. He used the rage, channeling it into a single, focused lunge. He slammed his shoulder into the wall at the precise point of the loose emitter. The housing shattered. The high-pitched whine died with a sputter of sparks. Silent, for the first time in months, true silence. It was like a drug. His mind, clear for a single, glorious moment, calculated the variables. The observation window, the door, the men who would come. He backed into the farthest corner, feigning collapse, his body trembling with manufactured weakness. He heard the hiss of the door unlocking. 2 guards entered. Tasers raised. He moved. He was a blur of contained fury. He disarmed the first guard, breaking his wrist with a precise snap. He used the second guard as a shield against the taser fire from the doorway, then threw the man's unconscious body into the corridor, creating a blockade. He didn't head for the exit. He knew it would be a trap. He headed deeper into the facility, following the scent of Albright's cologne, the sound of his panicked heartbeat. He burst into the central control room. Albright was there, frantically trying to activate a liquidation protocol on a console. Isaiah didn't give him the chance. He grabbed the doctor by his lab coat and lifted him off the ground. "Where is the antidote?" Isaiah growled, his voice raw from disuse. "There is no antidote," Albright squealed. "The changes are metabolic, permanent." Isaiah believed him. The hope for a cure died then, finally and completely. He was this forever. He looked at the console. He saw the liquidation protocol. It was a nerve gas designed to flood the entire facility, killing every test subject, every loose end, including him. With his free hand, he smashed the console. Then he dragged Albright to the main server bank. "Open it." Trembling, Albright input a code. The server racks hummed. Isaiah began ripping them out, smashing hard drives, tearing out wiring, unleashing a storm of destruction that would set their research back a decade. He left Albright curled and weeping amidst the wreckage. He wasn't a killer. He was a force of ruin. He fought his way out, a one-man army against Ethelgard's private security. He was shot, tasered, cut, but the monster they made would not fall. He emerged into the dawn, bleeding and battered but free. He stood on a hill overlooking the city. The sun was rising, its light no longer a dagger but a witness. Ethelgard was wounded, perhaps mortally. The world knew their secret. But he was still a monster. There was no going back to Layla, no cure, no peace.